this might go a little past the top of the hour, just so you're all aware. But I'll try and give you a good overview of what I went through. Thanks to Mike for organizing the barbecue. I'm just gonna switch audio. Ooh, the laptop. Okay. So definitely need to start with a lands acknowledgement. I went through a lot of Indigenous territories on this trip. I'm very grateful to live, work, and this is play for me, even though other people might not see it that way. Through the Pacific Northwest, I made every effort on this journey to use the BC Marine Trails, who are in active communication and collaboration with First Nations, to identify specific sites that are mutually beneficial for both mariners, the First Nations, to ensure that people camp in the spots that they want people to be camping in. So that was something that was important for me to mention. So I was asked just before this started how much I planned. I'd say about 6 months. The main goals were to make it home, fundraise for kids sport, I'll talk about that in a bit, and complete stage 2 in 16 to 20 days was my range. The distance of stage 2 is just over 1,100 kilometers, and that would entail 55 to 65 kilometers of paddling a day, which is 10 to 11 hours roughly. This at the bottom just shows some of the planning. I won't go into the full weeds of it, but I kind of made a whole project management sort of thing on the project and went through sponsorship and equipment and risk management and stuff, so that I felt confident and my spouse Emma felt confident in letting me go. So this is just one highlight. Thank you. People are laughing here because this is COVID risk planning, and I just did it in a race sense. So what are the things that I could control? What are the things I couldn't control? And what were the safeguards and like the residual risk? So I don't have to go into all that, but there was a lot of thought that went into this whole journey. So stage 1 started on June 5th. We went down to Port Townsend on the 4th. There's a little skippers meeting on the left there. They tell you to make smart decisions because last year people didn't make smart decisions. There were some rescues by the Coast Guard, hypothermia, the weather was terrible, and people who made the right decisions made it. People who didn't ended up in the newspaper. So you want to end up in the newspaper for the right reasons. The middle, there's a little come and view the vessels, mostly the small boats because the big ones are out on the water. So people would come and ask. The main questions are how much water are you carrying, how much food are you carrying, and why are you doing this? So yeah, I'd say hundreds of people came and chatted to me over a few hours. On the right here, this is about 4 a.m. on June 5th, getting ready to launch for the race. So hopefully this works. So in past years, they've played the Soviet national anthem to start the stage 1. Obviously, the last 2 years have not, so they've switched it to the Ukrainian national anthem. But yeah, this was probably one of the highlights of the race. It's amazing. 35 different teams, great energy. I would say 2,000. Emma was estimating that 2,000 people were showing up on the shores to cheer us off, which is amazing to see. Like, you don't expect that at 4:30 in the morning in a small little Washington state town. Just to highlight, you think I'm crazy, but this guy has plans to do it on a wind foil, which is right here behind me. His plan was to go across this year for stage 1, and if that worked out, do the full thing next year. So kayaks are crazy, wind foils are more crazy. I'll highlight a stand-up paddleboarder soon who I shared the race with, equally crazy. So this was stage 1. I saw that the office was following along, and it was kind of fun to catch up on my emails at the end of that day. We have the observatory right here in the distance, which is a great landmarker. And this just shows the the journey of the first stage, which was gorgeous conditions. You couldn't ask for anything better crossing the Juan de Fuca Strait. What I like about this one on the left or on the right that you might not notice are these little jagged lines. We would take a stop break at the top of every hour. And that just shows we were only going so fast because the current was really flowing out. So we would stop for about 2 minutes at the top of each hour and drift out with the sea. So that was just kind of a little sawtooth pattern that I thought was kind of interesting. So you arrive in Victoria, 7 or 9 hours later. You are greeted with a dock and a phone number. And I phone in and they say, what's your boat registration? And I go, it's a kayak. They go, oh, okay, well, what color is the kayak? I say, well, it's red and it's got a black top. And they're like, okay, good. And I don't know, a few more questions. I just thought that was kind of funny. And then they say, okay, you're good to go. After about 40 minutes waiting on hold. And then you paddle into the main dock just across from the Empress. And there was some race representatives there, and you ring a little bell to celebrate your completion of stage 1, and you're allowed to start on stage 2. What they don't mention is there's no valet service to the Empress to take your boat home. Most people don't care about that, but I was one of the few racers fortunate enough to actually live in Victoria, so I got to sleep in my own bed for 3 nights before taking off again. Most people sleep on their boats or in rental places. I thought this was interesting. This is, again, part of the packing, just everything that went into it has a place. My boat is 17.5 feet long, so I need to know it will fit. But actually, I didn't verify that until the day before the race. So this is the boat that was loaned to me by a local kayaking company, Blue Dog Kayaking. That's my own boat on the right. This one is much better for long distance travel. So that all fits in the boat on the right. This is the launch of stage 2. Again, I'd say 500 people watching on the breakwater. It was kind of cool. Everyone runs down to their boats or walks, as you see in the background, and heads out. These photos are from a local fellow, Tony Woodley. I met him on one of my training paddles on Clover Point when I was training in March, and he sent these along. He went down to Ogden Point and took pictures of all the boats going by. So this was nice because it all my photos are on the boat. So to actually see, with some depth of photo of what we went through around Ogden Point is kind of neat. I haven't talked about Peter. He's the fellow on the stand-up paddleboard. We agreed to go together for stage 1, and it went great. So we talked a bit and made sure that our plans sort of aligned and agreed to go together to start stage 2, and we'd play it by ear sort of as it went on, because I was a little hesitant about what a stand-up paddleboarder can actually do. There's definitely some limitations. And this boat on the bottom right is just another quirky boat that I gave no real chance at finishing, but they did, and they did amazing. They're awesome mariners. That cut off a bit. So this is our first night. Salt Spring Island is in the center at the end of the video. Sanson Narrows, it was about a 60-kilometer day. Gorgeous, calm day once we got around Oak Bay for the rest of the day. Not stage 2. Day 2, this was up towards Nanaimo. It was a bit choppy, but nothing we couldn't handle. And by the start of day 2, you see the rocks and the beach here. My boat probably weighs 100, maybe 120 pounds fully loaded, and then empty, it's more like 50. And it's just so much nicer to do that with someone else at the end of the day on the beach, and to have someone to talk to, have redundancy in equipment, planning, talking about tides and currents. So pretty much by the start of day 2 or the end of day 2, I'm just like, yeah, I'll stick with Peter, because even though there's some limitations of going in a paddleboard, it definitely is nice to have another person there to chat to. This is just partway through day 3. On the right is Hornby Island. We stopped at Ford's Cove for a snack, some not hydrated. Oh, Stuart, that's cool. I'll talk about him later. And I think that's Mount Benson on the left. This is us coming around to Kitty Coleman Park near the end of day 3. Day 3 was another awesome day. I don't think we could have asked for a better start to the first 3 days. So Kitty Coleman Park is just south of Campbell River. This was our first sighting of a whale. I don't think I captured the picture of the whale in the background, but that was cool. We were on shore, but we would have many interactions soon with whales. It's a great campsite. You can drive in. I'd recommend it. On the right is just some of my race preparation. I did a lot of training with a fellow who said, you need to take an Advil like 4 times a day for the whole race. And I went, I don't know if I want to do that. So it was nice to have starting the day with an Advil though, especially after about 3 days. So we went north towards past Campbell River. I say this is the 12th ferry crossing because they go on half-hour basis, and we were against tide, against wind, just plodding along, probably going about 2 or 3 kilometers an hour. So we spent 6 hours to get to Campbell River, and I saw the ferries go across 12 times, and I counted that. So that was interesting. There's Peter. We're just heading in for lunch there on the left, and lunch was definitely pre-planned in that planning document of I'm stopping at MacDonald's and I don't care what anyone else says about it. So yeah, two Big Macs and an ice cream thing, and yeah, I called it bunker fuel. So yeah, then we go past Campbell River. This was some fun water. Top left there is the current that can be experienced through Seymour Narrows, which is, hopefully you can see my cursor up here. But just because that's the current that's going through here, it's about 70% speed through this portion. So with the wind coming against us and the current pushing us towards Seymour Narrows, it really stirred up the water. Current against wind creates a challenging sea state. So this is Peter battling that. We had a helping current, but the wind was against, so it was sort of a neutral condition. And actually, I should point out, I don't know if it was in the last slide, just on the right there, this is where Stuart joined us for the rest of my trip. With Seymour Narrows, you can only go through at specific times. So Stuart really wasn't in a rush, and he was happy to hang out with us on the beach. He saw us going in and watched our boats, and we joined forces, which was great as it turned out. Going through Seymour Narrows was an awesome highlight. It was amazing. You can tell how much power of the water going out and back there actually is. And we only went through and it was going at about 1 or 2 knots, helping us, but it can get up to 16. And I'll just say there's a great hike on both sides of Seymour Narrows. If you can time it with max flood or ebb, it's amazing to see. I did that once and I would highly recommend that. So we made it into Browns Cove, which is just beyond Seymour Narrows. We rounded the corner and someone was cheering off their balcony, but they missed that the rule of thumb was that if you see us and you're cheering for us, you need to invite us up for dinner, but that didn't happen. So we went to the Browns Cove Marina restaurant, which is great. Camped just where I took this middle picture. This just shows the wind. That's my tent. I didn't peg it down. I did after that. So this is the following day, day 5, heading out of Browns Cove up Discovery Passage. In the middle there, you see Stuart just on the horizon. I'm glad that I paddled with 2 other people because no one wants to watch a kayak bow for 45 minutes on a recap video. So I get some footage of other people, which kind of gives it some perspective. But yeah, these were probably 5 to 6 foot waves or 2-meter waves. So if you imagine you're sitting in a boat, you're probably about 1 meter out of the water. So the horizon disappears for short periods of time as you go through these waves. On the left, we found a little old logging camp to stop because we had to wait for the tide to change after a little bit of time. And on the right is Peter with some nice whitecaps in the back catching us because it's much harder on a paddleboard. So we made it to Elk Bay. This is just an example of one of my meals. Nice Trangia stove full of goodies and dehydrated food. I had about 14 days of food planned for an 18 to 20 day trip. So the plan was to restock at some point, drying out stuff every night as you can. And I'm very happy with how my hands held up for the race. We knew that there was bad weather coming the following day, so we launched at 4 a.m. Before sunrise to get out of Elk Bay to see how far we could get. As it turned out, that was about 10 kilometers in 3 or 4 hours, so not making good pace by any means. That's Peter on the stand-up paddleboard with our lights. And we showed up to Rock Bay, which is a little, I'll call it a trailer park community and camping site. And I remember knocking on the manager's door at about 7 a.m. She comes out in her pajamas and I say, "Can I camp here tonight?" at 7 a.m. for that night. And she said, "Oh, you're with the damn race, aren't you?" Because previous racers had stayed there 2 days or the night before. So I said yes, and she was very kind and let us stay. And it was a great site. And one of the residents of this community actually saw our plight, and since we were there so early, I think she had some time to prepare us a nice dinner. The joke here was that all this came out of the Jetboil and dehydrated package, but it was actually it came from Linda, who was a great sport and helped us, refueled us one night. But yeah, it was a 2 to 3 day storm, and we pushed through it the first day and the second day, and then day 3 came and we were thinking, can we make it? Can we not make it? There was a big rock bluff here, and we just were sitting around all day the following day and just saying, oh, we want to make it. Let's go for it. And we made it from, I'll say, Elk Bay around to Rock Bay here, 10 kilometers. The following day, we left here, went, oh, that was a mistake, and went in here. So that was about 2.5 kilometer day. That was our shortest day of the trip. Yeah, terrible winds through Johnston Strait, probably like 30 to 40 knot headwind, and you can't make any progress in that. So a lot of effort to repack and unpack, but we kept going. And then everything calmed down. This was the best day, the farthest day. We went over 100 kilometers. We had a nice ebbing current for most of the day and calm winds. So this is looking out past a point called Ripple Point towards Sayward. And it was a gorgeous day. There was a bit of haze from the Sayward fires. That was sort of the only smoke we had the whole trip. And all this moving water up here is just the current flowing out. There's so much snow melt and rivers flowing in. Salt water is obviously denser than fresh water, so it really pushes out the water as it flows out to the ocean. So yeah, you definitely need to be aware. This was later in the day, West Carcroft Island. We were going in for lunch and said, hey, there's something moving on that beach. And it turned out to be 2 bears. So we went to the next beach about 200 meters down, but they were finding some good lunch. So we knew there was something to eat. And this is looking back from Sayward. There was a big vessel under tow, or looking back down eastward of Johnston Strait. So this is at the end of the 100-kilometer day, the Owl Island camp in the Broughton Group, just north of Telegraph Cove. And it's a fun game to play when you see these boats in the fog, because the thought is that a small boat close or a big boat far? And you don't know. And then you come off center of it, and yeah, that was a cruise ship. So it's your mind plays tricks on you in sort of the fog and distance when you aren't so experienced. This is just an idea of what a campsite looks like. This is a BC Marine Trail site, so we knew there'd be a few campsites available, or flat areas. This is on the north side of Queen Charlotte Strait, north of Port Hardy, like on the far side. Stuart in his surf ski kayak, which is open, another crazy aspect, and Peter on his paddleboard. Both these boats had I think they're like Venturi draining systems, so as long as you're moving, the boat will drain water, any water that's coming in, but you have to keep moving if you're in rough water. So stopping was done in prime locations as much as we could. We tried to stop every hour though to take a snack and a drink. We made it to Shelter Inlet, which is just south of Cape Caution. This is another meal, just adding cooking oil to mashed potatoes for extra calories. So that was interesting. I don't know if I'd do that again, but it was. And there was a gorgeous multi-million-dollar sailboat that waved at us, but again didn't invite us on for dinner. So that was too bad. So this was the most challenging day technically. We went around Cape Caution, which is, if you know it, it is exposed to the open ocean. This is just before heading out. Yeah, there were probably 2 meter in the forecast seas, reasonable winds, and we kind of, at this point on the left, we were talking like, do we want to go, but it was the same forecast for the next 2 or 3 days, so it's like, well, we're gonna go. So that was the plan. I don't know if Peter had ever been in anything quite like that, because he's from Vancouver, so it was a learning experience. So this just shows some of the water. These are two different videos. The left, he's standing, and then he realizes it's better to go on his knees. But these are probably 2 to 3 meter waves approaching Cape Caution, and they're not bad. They're just like big swells, and you lose the horizon in between, and you come down. So I don't want to say it was impossible, but it's tiring. Like, you do it for 6 hours, and you're stabilizing, and this part, at least, the swells were very consistent. As we got further on, Cape Caution has a very shallow seabed, and it sort of stirs up all the water, and it became more challenging. This is just a little side-by-side footage. That's roughly our location at this point. But there's primary swells, which were 2 to 3 meters, secondary swells from a sort of 90-degree. So your boat rocks, and it's a tiring circumstance, but nothing we couldn't handle. This was taken on Table Island on the left, which is right here, about 80% of the way through the day, and just big crashing swells. We were on the east side, so we were protected, but the goal was to make it up to Krantz, the point up here around the bay, and land on that beach, which we did. This area was complete mess. It's like a dishwasher is what we called it, or a washing machine. We should have stayed wider and gone around. Stuart did, but we just wanted to get in, so we took the shortest route, which turned out to be much rougher with crashing swells and stuff. This was the camp. Great, nice calm spot looking down Rivers Inlet, just north of Cape Caution. We ran into 2 fellows who were rowing from Port Hardy up to Ketchikan. They're 2 old fishermen. I shouldn't say that if they're online, but they're they're in their 70s. John and Terry. I'd actually heard about them from another in my preparations, because they had started last year and had to withdraw, not in the race at all, doing this on their own time, and then they were finishing their journey this year. So it was kind of neat to run into them, and they were happy to run into us. So this is four racers here. This is Rob. We just ran into him happenstance. It was kind of neat because we would intermingle with other racers as we ran into them, even though there's vast distances, and as soon as you're 500 meters away, you can't see who's where. This was just the launch the next day, and how they launched their rowing shell. It was a bit of a process on beach rollers, and then a boat came out that was tracking us. Actually turned out to be a friend of Stuart's here in this surf ski. He's half the year he's a doctor in Bella Bella, which is the town halfway through the race. So he's got a lot of connections up and down the coastline. So he came out and gave us some coffee and cookies, and that was gladly accepted at that point. This was the following day, just to show. I need to explain myself if people were watching this closely. I imagine most weren't, but I had a few questions saying what happened there. And this was the most gorgeous sunrise I've ever seen on the left. It's a shame that the picture doesn't do it justice. But it was an annoying headwind, and I just put my head down and put some music earbuds in and went across. This is about 8 kilometers across, so that takes about maybe 2-3 hours in the headwind. And I actually got separated from the other 2 guys, and then I looped back here looking for them, and it was messy. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where they are. So I'm just going to keep going to Bella Bella, and I'll see them when I see them. But actually they were further up on the beach, and they called me out as I paddled by, and thought, oh, good. I don't have to do the rest of the day. alone. These are some whale shots because there were many and I had to narrow it down to just a few. So there's going to be a big tail there on the right. That's a humpback. And then on the left, there's an orcapod that went by. These are probably 50 meters away. And at our closest, we had an interaction that was probably about 10 meters away. We thought we created sort of an artificial bubble net between the three boats, and a humpback came up right about 10 meters between the three of us, spacing between, and just went up about 3 or 4 meters and went straight back down. And there were some profanities after that because that was a little close for comfort. So this is Stuart coming into to Bella Bella. He's got a big home crowd there, and his wife organized some great food for us. I know it's unsupported, but this is kind of a gray area because she helps all the paddlers that come through. So we stayed there overnight at his house and had some good food. And this is where I think the barbecue, Scott is still hungry because it became a thing that we were eating more than most. So yeah, drying out our stuff, great food, awesome community. We stayed overnight. This is the grocery store. It just got restocked. It gets restocked twice a week by ferry, which is kind of neat and different from what you experience in Victoria. We got a tour of their big house, which is amazing. And so some of the inside, this is about, I think it was completed about 4 years ago, but these awesome old growth trees, I'd imagine, and the community events. We unfortunately didn't witness one, but I've seen some social media posts later on of different community events, and it looks like an amazing building to be a part of. So it was very powerful. So this is launching out of Bella Bella. Peter was having some troubles at this point. It's a very inefficient form of travel, and into a headwind especially. So, but he continued on with us. I didn't see it as much as I think Stuart did, but he wanted to keep going. So we went onward from Bella Bella north towards Clemtu, and we stopped at Lady Douglas Camp Cove. We thought it would just be a camp, but actually we stumbled across a cabin, which is free to use for anyone who needs it. And yeah, it was a nice night to have a roof over your head and not need to actually set up a tent for once, which is great. And we stumbled into that Toy Box Express the following morning. Everyone's going at similar paces, so you kind of run into people. But there was a nice tailwind, so they took off later in the hour and got way ahead of us at that point. This is Clemtu. This is sort of spirit bear territory. We didn't see one, but we saw tons of eagles and deer and stuff along the shore. The most eagles I've ever seen. This is the big house in Clemtu, and this is where Peter decided that it was not safe or prudent for him to continue on. Unfortunately, he did amazing. This is the second farthest that a paddleboard has ever made it in this race. So I think he has a lot to be proud of. It was hard. Yeah, and it still is hard. I respect what he did, and it was a challenge. He shed some tears, and I shed some tears as we paddled away. So yeah. So we continued on without him, and went up Lady Princess Strait, or I forget the name of it. But this just shows an example of a more rural camp that isn't actually on any maps. And what you need to do when you camp is understand how high the tide is going to come in. So that's very important. I think the tide came to about here, but you stand at the water line, you see what the tide is doing right now on your little digital device, and you say, okay, it's going to come up 4 feet. And then you say, where's 4 feet? Look straight ahead and say, okay, my tent's good. So that's what I did there. And everything was good. And this is just, it's called a road. It's also been called a prison because you just follow the map, and or you follow the coastline. There's no choices. You just go straight in, straight out. And it can be really annoying with currents because there's nowhere to escape really. Just speaking of currents, you can learn a lot from bull kelp. Bull kelp is amazing. It shows you dynamic range of the tide, but it can also show you the current. There may be a current going one way or another way, but there's back eddies, and the bull kelp will always go to the direction that the current is going. So it's not really demonstrated in this picture very well, but there's current coming down against us, and this kelp is actually pushing back that way. So you can ride back eddies along the shore and make good progress even when the current is not in your favor. This is a great waterfall along the very steep sheer cliffs, and a BC ferry heading down from Port Hardy down to Bella Bella. And yeah, the most interesting part of this day was we decided to skip Buttedale as our lunch stop, and it was sheer cliffs for the next 30 kilometers. So I spent 11 hours straight sitting in the boat between campsites, which was a long time to stay seated. And this is the campsite at the end of that day. Very rocky bluff, but if you clear the rocks away, you can make a little coffin-sized tent pad. And this was the sunrise we were greeted with the next day, so that was pretty special. Another picture of the sunrise and the G that fell off my boat at some point along the way. And this is the next day. We were greeted by some racers that had finished the race and were on their way back on sailboats, so that was kind of fun. They took a picture and refilled my water for me, so that was nice. Mid Grenville Channel. Grenville Channel is a struggle for everyone in this race who's a human-powered vessel, and no one really understands the currents or where the midpoint is and where you're being helped and where you're being hindered. So later on, when we all rode the ferry back, we were just grilling the captain, being like, where is it? Like, tell us about Grenville Channel. And he's like, well, in a very high level, it comes in on both sides and then it flows out on both sides. And you just kind of have to, understand that. And we were all rolling our eyes being like, of course we understand that, but we realized that he doesn't care because he's got access to the most powerful engine that you could possibly care. And he doesn't care about, 2 knots of current or 3 knots of current, whereas boats that travel that speed definitely care about that sort of thing. So yeah, just a campsite, another long, narrow channel. This one wasn't quite a sheer cliff, so there were more landing opportunities, which was nice. This is another BC ferry. We'd have a big boat pass us maybe every 2 hours or so, but other than that, it was us out there alone. So it was pretty cool. But I'm glad Stuart stayed on with me afterwards, because it would have been a whole another challenge to do it solo rather than solo tandem. Yeah, so we got up towards Port Prince Rupert, and that's where some marine fog caught us the next day. We launched off Portshire Island here, and we followed the shore successfully, and then we came out here and it was clear and we could see Stevens Island, but then everything just dropped on us, and it kind of shows the distance that you can see, maybe like 50 meters, and then it's nothing. And there were, I called it a symphony of foghorns around us. So you're a little scared going through that, but Stuart is a very proficient seaman. He's sailed offshore and he was confident, so I was glad I was with him. He's done amazing adventures in his own time. And we actually had cell service. So this was my idea, there's a AIS app that shows you reporting ships, and we weren't sure, we knew where we were, but we weren't sure where the other ships were. We could just hear foghorns. So this is the kind of ship you don't want to be run over by, because they won't even know they've hit you. And this was the pilot ship that sort of goes out to greet them and send a person ashore, on board and drive the boat for them in these harbors. So it was interesting to see where these boats have been previously and like where you need to actually be aware. We transited to these islands through pretty dense fog, and then we had to cross to here, and just to do it as quickly as possible and know where you need to be as quickly as possible. But once this boat got by, it was pretty open, so we were confident after that. But there's still foghorns going all around, so you're a little on edge. And this is when the fog finally cleared, where we came out of it rather. On the left, it'll keep going and show what we came out of. Very, very dense stuff, but we made it across to Douglas Island off Prince Rupert, and there was another fog bank. And this was awesome because this was our first view of Alaska here through the big mountains. And then on the left here, there'll be an orca pod that went by us. It was closer, but that's the best footage I had of it. And this was the hardest point of the whole trip. About a 75-kilometer day. We turned the corner. We could have camped on Douglas Island, but we wanted to go to the official BC Marine Trails site to the Gnarled Island camp. And that's about 3 kilometers. And I think that took me over an hour, and it was terrible. And the campsite was gorgeous, but it had the worst flies I've ever seen. And that's the one I talk about in the end of the race, where I ate a pound of dried apricots for dinner and went to bed because that's all I had energy for. So, yeah, I'm glad that's over. This is the next morning. Honestly, we had amazing weather for this crossing. It can also be very tumultuous, but we had fortune, and we were worried that we would have another fog morning because it takes time for the fog to burn off, but fortunately it was clear. So we crossed over to Cape Fox over here on the right, which is Alaska. Saw that. There were hundreds of fishing vessels out. We assumed that there was a timed fishing opening for the industry, and because at noon they all disappeared and we don't know where they went. But we came up to Cape Fox and there was just boats and boats and big nets out the back with buoys, and we didn't want to get tangled. So that was kind of interesting to witness. And then a sailboat came up and they were looking for us, and they had these little care packages, which we gratefully accepted. But when you're dehydrated and hungry, and popcorn and beer isn't exactly the thing you want, maybe some cheese and Gatorade. But anyway, we gratefully accepted and ate it once the race was over. Just not at that time. This is the final night campsite. When you pick a campsite, you want to maintain 3 things. Ideally, it's sandy. There's a dry spot to pitch your tent and store your boats, and that the carry isn't too long the next morning. And we knew we had 2 of those 3, but at this point we were pretty tired, so we just said it'll be a long carry in the morning. But yeah, that was probably, I don't know, 200-meter carry out to the water the next morning when the tide went out. And this is a big cruise ship going by at about 5 in the morning on its way to Ketchikan. We're about 40 kilometers outside Ketchikan at this point. This was the final morning, another gorgeous flat morning. Couldn't ask for anything better. But then the fog descended for a little bit, which was tricky because there's a lot of cruise ships going by, so you want to stick to shore. But then as we rounded the corner to Ketchikan, it all cleared up with the land heating the air. So we had a nice straight shot into Ketchikan, which was nice. And this is the finish. We were greeted by other human-powered racers. Everyone here on the left had planned to take the ferry down, which was happening on the 28th of June. And that was always in my mind as the date I wanted to be there by, the 27th, and then take the ferry the 28th. So that was kind of my personal deadline because I didn't want to be stuck in Ketchikan with a boat for some amount of time, unknown amount of time. But it was great to be greeted by all these other racers. We actually did finish last, but that's why it says the final ones. But we finished and it was awesome, and saw this on the front page of the Ketchikan Daily News the next day. So I bought a couple copies of that, which was kind of fun. And this was first meal back in civilization, a hamburger. And then we had a racer potluck, which was really special. Like all the racers, human-powered racers, were still there. And there were a few other people going on to Skagway, not in the race, just going on their own adventures. And a lot of people stay at the Ketchikan Yacht Club because they've got a great dock and space to hang out. And you can see what everyone was missing for their whole trip was there were 5 different salads, and then someone brought protein, which was nice, but everyone was missing their fresh fruit and veg. So that was what everyone brought to the potluck. And then the next day we had to make our way to the ferry, which is most efficiently done by boat. So I had to get back in the kayak for 2 more kilometers, and you can see the ferry there. And we landed at a boat launch about 500 meters or so down from the ferry, and we had to walk all these boats down the middle lane of a 3-lane road, sort of 2 alternating and then a left turn lane. And there was a lot of smirks and people taking photos. So we didn't see the newspaper the next day, but we figured we might have been on the front page for 2 straight days with walking down the middle of the highway. This is all the boats on the big boat on the ferry on the left. That's my camping setup. We didn't splurge for a room. So that was very, still felt luxurious. And this is a sunshade rather than a rain shade. And I was happy to not be out in this. This is the stuff we went back through on Dixon Entrance out from Prince Rupert. Whitecaps, the boat was doing big jumps. So happy to be safely on a large vessel. And came home. This is in Bellingham, just the group unpacked, and we met up with Peter that night, took Stuart home he was on a flight out the next day back to Bella Bella, and had dinner with Peter and caught up. So that was a great conclusion to the trip, sort of catch up with him. And then the fundraiser was awesome. I phoned the fundraiser local coordinator in January, and I said, I think $3,000 to $10,000, and then she put $10,000 as the goal, and I went, uh-oh. And then we made it, so that was awesome. And yeah, thanks to everyone who donated to that. I was told that this will allow over 30 kids in Victoria to participate in sports for a semester, so that was awesome to hear. Yeah, thanks to everyone who donated. The Blue Dog for giving me a kayak, and then the fundraiser went great. So thanks, everyone. I'm happy to take a few questions if you have any. The ferry back costed about $300, I think, or maybe that was US though. It's not a cheap ferry, but when you prorate it to like a BC Ferries rate, it makes sense because you're on it for about 40 hours. So yeah, the price made sense. Much more for a car though, if the rowing boats got dinged as real cars. So yeah, because they take up more floor space, so they got expensive. It was expensive for them, but as a kayak, it was like $70. Will you do it again? Maybe, but not next year. I have some family that might have interest in doing it in a sailboat, and another friend who I met, Damien, he did it in the single rowboat, and he said he has a 4-person rowboat, and he has me earmarked for 2 years from now. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. Okay, I'll take in-person questions if there are any. Or not. Okay, yeah. I think the scariest part was, I didn't include the video, but the fog outside Prince Rupert, there was one instance where there was a motorboat that wouldn't be reporting its location, and it was going along, not at a fast speed, but at a reasonable speed. And we could hear it. We stop, hear it, and just say, okay, I think that's going in front of us. And it did go in front of us, but I have a video because I wanted for the insurance claim. Where it passes by and it's just in the edge of our view, but we're essentially driftwood to them. Like, they're going at a speed where they think they have time to stop, and you have no control over anything. They're probably not on radio. So that was the scariest part. Apart from that, yeah, it was nice to go with Peter in the paddleboard because he had limits that were built in that he just couldn't progress in certain weather conditions. And we stuck with him and respected that. But I might have made some more challenging decisions had I not been with him. So it was good. It was a good mitigator to actually go with the paddleboarder to make smart decisions. Any others, or?
And you did use this bear spray.
I had never used the bear spray. We saw tons of evidence of bears, probably at about a half dozen sites, but we only actually ever saw the bears on the beach in Johnston Strait. Yep.
How close were you to getting the water balance actually?
I think I had about 2 days of food left at the end, so I was pretty happy with that. There was one instance where I almost or did run out of water. When you're on islands, there's no water supplies, so you kind of want the big sheer cliffs where there's snow melt or streams. So that was right as we went into Alaska, but I was with Stuart and he had a bit of spare water, so he loaned me some of that. But we found water once we made it to Alaska, but it shows the importance of paying attention to your supplies. Yep.
What was your like highlight of the geographic layout?
I think Seymour Narrows is awesome. Going through the way we did with a group, I didn't show it here, but we went through with 4 different boats. And it just showed me how much power, and I've seen how much power it was. And we went through in relatively benign conditions, I would say, from what it can do. Like there's whirlpools and it can be nasty if you're not careful going through it the right or wrong time. But it was pretty awesome to see, even in those benign conditions, how powerful it is there. So yeah, and the Johnson Strait day, like you couldn't ask for anything better. You're going fast, it's calm, it's happy.
I think it was
Yes, actually, there's a great CBC documentary that I watched a few years ago on Seymour Narrows on the Ripple Rock detonation. It's from like the 1950s or something, and it's a fun watch. It's only like 20 minutes long, so I'd recommend that because it ends with a big bang.
I was there, I watched it.
Well, the first thing I ever saw on television, neighbors had it filmed. And we went to see it on the news.
Yeah.
And of course, it was filmed on film and then broadcast later, but.
Yeah.
It was a big fan.
I'd imagine. Well, valuable. I'm glad I didn't have to go through, even though I wouldn't have hit it, but my draft isn't that deep.
Well, environmentalists said that was excessive crazy.
Yeah.
So with Seymour Narrows, are you wanting to go through it slack tide, or you don't want to take advantage of the 9 knots of tail?
You do. When I planned it, I wanted to go through with tail, but it was against the wind, so it would have been very stirred up. If there was no wind, I would have gone through with more of a tail. But you saw, I showed the passage in front of Campbell River. It's very hard to time it perfectly because there's so much impact before and after that you also have to time perfectly. So it's a challenging body of water, and I think I overestimated in my planning how easy it would be to transit that specific area. So yeah. Let's just do one more check. How did you learn about different campsites? Oh, I actually reviewed the last 3 or 4 years of human-powered vessels. Everything is archived. So if you go through, you can pick out 3 or 4 racers that made it the whole way, and you can see where they camped. But you just have to understand that just because they camped there at their tide height doesn't mean you can camp there at your tide height. So I had all their GPS locations marked in a file, but they were sort of like questionable, like don't do this unless you have to. But as it turned out, everywhere they camped were places I camped often, or the BC Marine Trails sites. So that's how you do your research for that. So yeah, we had a few new sites as well. So maybe someone will reuse those if they do the research. Okay, well, thanks everyone.